Elias Boone had spent years in the wild frontier, braving storms, wild animals, in the silence of endless forests. He thought he'd seen the worst this land could throw at a man, until one cold morning changed everything. The old outhouse creaked as he pushed the door open, and his heart nearly stopped. Inside, a young woman crouched in the dirt, chained to the wall like an animal. Her hair hung in filthy tangles, her dress was little more than rags, and her eyes, wide, wet, and trembling, spoke of months, maybe years, of unthinkable terror. Before Elias could even speak, a shadow fell across the doorway. A voice, low and dangerous, curled through the morning air. "Well, well, you found my little secret." The valley whispered in the cold wind, and for the first time in years, Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with weather. Elias was a lumberjack by trade, a man who made his living swinging an axe against the bones of the forest. It was a lonely profession, but he had grown used to it. He even preferred it. Out here, there were no saloons full of gossip, no church deacons prying into a man's business, no false promises of companionship, only the creak of trees, the hiss of wind, and the long echo of his own thoughts. Yet even a man like Elias needed help from time to time, and that was why he was traveling to Jedediah Wynn's ranch that day. His axe handle had split 2 mornings before while felling a stubborn pine, and without it, his winter preparations would fall apart. Folks said Jedediah kept a small stock of quality hickory, and Elias needed that wood if he wanted to survive the months ahead. Work without the proper tools meant empty hands, and empty hands meant hunger. But as the wagon rattled deeper into the isolated valley, Elias couldn't shake a gnawing unease. The frontier had a way of swallowing men whole. There were old stories whispered around campfires, about hunters who went off alone and never came back, about strangers who passed down these trails only to vanish like smoke. In towns like Clearwater or Dry Creek, people might shake their heads, mumble about wolves or river accidents, and go on with their lives. Neighbors rarely interfered in another man's affairs. Out here, survival often meant looking the other way. Elias thought of Tom Burrell, a trapper he'd known years ago. Tom had set out one winter to trade furs with an isolated homestead, rumored to be strange, and he never returned. When the thaw came, only his empty sled was found near a frozen creek, its harnesses cut clean. People muttered that he'd likely drown, but Elias had always felt there was more to the story. The frontier could be silent, yes, but silence often hid something. He tightened his grip on the reins as his horses clopped over a frost-stiffened rise. The sun had climbed, but the valley ahead seemed locked in shadow, the pines crowding close as if to keep secrets from prying eyes. Far below, the Wynn Ranch crouched against the hills, a smudge of gray wood and crooked fences. Even from a distance, the place carried an unnerving stillness. Elias exhaled slowly. He told himself this was just another errand, just another lonely trail. But in the pit of his stomach, something stirred, a quiet warning that this day would not end like any other. The wheels of Elias Boone's wagon groaned as they rolled down the last slope toward the Wynn Ranch. From a distance, the property looked like any other frontier homestead. An aging cabin, a weathered barn, a small corral with a leaning gate. But as Elias drew closer, an uncanny stillness pressed against his senses. The frontier was often quiet, yes, but this quiet felt wrong. No chickens pecked in the yard. No dogs trotted out barking a warning. The barn doors hung slightly open, creaking in the wind, but no livestock stirred inside. Even the wind seemed to lower its voice as it moved through the valley, leaving only the hollow clatter of wagon wheels over frozen dirt. Elias reined in the horses and let them snort in the cold air. He scanned the ranch slowly, the unease growing heavy in his chest. Frontier life had taught him that silence meant two things, either peace or the kind of danger that waited for you to step closer. He called out, his voice carrying across the yard, "Jedediah, you home?" The sound bounced off the cabin walls and returned to him in an empty echo. No answer. Elias stayed on the wagon seat for a long moment, listening. He thought about all the rumors he had heard over the years in Clearwater. Some said Jedediah Wynn had never recovered from his wife's death. Others swore he had become a bitter hermit, keeping to himself and driving off strangers. And then there were the whispers, the kind folks said only after a drink, that he had gone strange like other isolated ranchers before him. Elias had seen it happen before. The frontier could hollow out a man's soul if he lived too long without company. He remembered a story from 2 winters back about old Carter, a trapper who roamed the timberlands near Red Bluff. Carter had gone to trade with a reclusive rancher after a heavy snow. He never returned. When spring came, neighbors found his empty sled tangled in brush along the frozen creek. Some blamed wolves, but Elias had never believed that. He had seen the harnesses. They'd been cut clean, as if by human hands. Shaking off the memory, Elias climbed down from the wagon. His boots crunched over frost-stiffened dirt as he walked toward the silent cabin. Up close, the house looked worse than from the road. The wooden siding was warped and splintered, the porch sagging under years of neglect. A half-empty whiskey bottle leaned against the doorframe like a forgotten sentinel. He knocked on the door. No response. He tried the handle. The latch gave with a reluctant squeal. The interior smelled of dust, cold ash, and stale liquor. A single chair sat overturned near the hearth, as if someone had risen abruptly and never set it right. Cobwebs draped the corners, undisturbed. The air felt thick, unmoving. Elias muttered to himself, "Ain't right. None of this is right." Stepping back outside, he noticed tracks in the dirt, leading from the house toward the small outhouse at the edge of the yard. The prints were uneven, almost dragging. A shiver worked its way up his spine, though the wind had stilled. He paused, gripping the porch post, and let his eyes wander over the empty corral and leaning fences. The entire property seemed to hold its breath, as if the land itself waited for him to decide whether he'd keep walking. Elias had learned to trust his instincts out here. The last time he had ignored a feeling like this was the day he nearly lost his life under a falling pine. Out here, hesitation could be the difference between survival and an unmarked grave. His gaze settled on the outhouse again. A weathered little structure with a slanted roof, its wood gone gray with rot. In another life, it was an unremarkable sight. But in this place, in this silence, it felt like the center of something dark. Elias Boone drew a long breath, steadying the sudden tightness in his chest. Something was wrong on this ranch. Bone deep wrong, and the answers waited down that short path to the outhouse. The short path to the outhouse felt longer than any trail Elias Boone had ever walked. Each step crunched on the frost-hardened dirt, the sound unnaturally loud in the still air. His breath fogged in front of him, rising like thin smoke, and his fingers tightened around the handle of his hatchet. More for courage than for defense. He paused a few feet from the weathered little structure, letting the unease wash over him. The boards were warped and gray, the door leaning on rusted hinges. A thin crack ran down the side, and through it he thought he heard something. Not quite a voice, not quite an animal either. It was a whimper. The sound stopped him cold. He had heard that sound before in the timber camps, when a dog got its paw caught in a trap, or when a man whispered through cracked lips after being pinned beneath a log. It was the sound of pain trying to stay quiet. Elias's stomach knotted. He stepped closer, slow and careful. "Hello?" His voice was soft, uncertain. "Someone in there?" A faint rustle answered him, then silence. He swallowed hard, heart pounding, and reached for the latch. His hand hovered there, suddenly heavy. Every instinct screamed that once he opened this door, his life would change. Some truths, once seen, could never be shut away again. The whimper came again, followed by the scrape of a chain. Elias yanked the door open. Inside crouched a young woman, chained to the wall, her dress in tatters and her hair matted with dirt. Her wide, trembling eyes told him everything. Months, maybe years, of silent terror. Before he could speak, a shadow fell across the doorway. "Well, well," a voice growled, low and rough as gravel. "You found my little secret." Elias Boone rose slowly, his palms slick with sweat, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. Behind him, the shadow of Jedediah Wynne stretched long across the frost, stiffened ground. When Elias turned, the image burned itself into his memory. A man hardened by the frontier, jaw stubbled, eyes cold as slate, and a rifle gripped tight in his calloused hands. "You shouldn't have come around back, Boone," Jedediah said, his voice flat and dangerous. "Some things ain't meant for outsiders to see." Elias's eyes flicked between the rifle and the frail figure of Clara, still chained in the corner. Her breath came in shallow, panicked gasps. He'd heard stories of frontier cruelty, but standing here, seeing it, smelling it, was different. It was a rotting truth that no decent man could ignore. "That's your daughter," Elias said, his voice steady but low. "Ain't no business of mine to judge a man's grief, but this," he gestured to the chains, "this ain't grief. This is cruelty." Jedediah's jaw twitched, a vein rising along his temple. "She ain't right in the head," he snapped. "Since her mama died, she's had spells, gets wild, dangerous to herself, to others. Keeping her here is the only way to keep her safe." Elias's stomach churned. He glanced back at Clara, whose hollow eyes silently begged him to see the truth. "Safe?" Elias said softly. "She's skin and bones. When's the last time you fed her more than scraps?" The rancher shrugged, his voice turning cold as steel. "She gets what she needs, more than most would give to something like her." The words cut deeper than the wind. Elias saw it in Clara's flinch, in the way her eyes glistened with shame that didn't belong to her. And in that moment, Elias knew he could not leave without her. "You're gonna unchain her," he said quietly. Jedediah's laugh cracked through the morning like dry wood snapping. "The hell I am. You're gonna get back on that wagon and forget you ever saw this. Unless—" He lifted the rifle, the barrel glinting in the weak sunlight. "You want to join her?" The standoff tightened like a noose. Elias measured the distance between them. Too far to rush, too close to turn his back. He felt Clara's eyes boring into him, a fragile thread of hope hanging between them. Then from behind him, her voice trembled through the air. "There were others." The words landed like stones in a grave. Jedediah's face snapped toward her, fury rising in his eyes. "Shut your mouth, girl!" But Clara's voice grew stronger. "The traveling preacher last spring, the cattle buyer in summer. They found me. They promised to help. And they never left." Elias's blood went cold. The missing men, the stories whispered in saloons and logging camps. Jedediah hadn't just imprisoned his daughter. He had killed to keep his secret. The old rancher's hands tightened around the rifle. "Some problems solve themselves permanent," he said, voice like gravel sliding down steel. Elias's body moved before his mind caught up. Years of swinging axes and dodging falling timber had honed his reflexes. When the rifle jerked upward, he dove sideways, rolling into the frost-bitten dirt. A thunderous crack shattered the morning. Splinters burst from the outhouse wall where his head had been. Pain burned along his forearm where the bullet grazed him, but adrenaline drowned it out. He scrambled behind the water trough, heart hammering. "Could have been quick, Boone." Jedediah roared, working the rifle's lever. "Now it's gonna hurt." Elias scanned the yard. No weapon, no cover, except a rusted shovel leaning against the outhouse wall. But Clara's chain caught his eye. The wood around the anchor ring was cracked and rotting. Hope flickered. "Clara!" he hissed. "The chain! Pull it!" Her thin fingers wrapped around the iron. She tugged, weak at first, then with a surge of desperate strength. The wood groaned. Jedediah cursed and fired again, the bullet sparking off the trough. Elias didn't wait. He sprinted from cover, diving to Clara's side. His shoulder screamed in protest, but he grabbed the chain with both hands and yanked with everything he had. With a splintering crack, the ring ripped free. Clara stumbled forward, eyes wide, legs trembling from months of captivity. "Run!" Elias barked, shoving her toward the wagon. Behind them, Jedediah Wynn roared, his boots pounding the frozen dirt. The chase and the fight for freedom had begun. The moment the chain snapped, Clara Wynn stumbled forward, her legs shaking as if they belonged to someone else. Elias Boone caught her by the arm, steadying her just long enough to bark, "Run to the wagon! Don't look back!" The morning air erupted with the crack of a rifle. Dirt exploded near their feet. Clara screamed but kept moving, her bare toes scraping the frozen earth as she sprinted toward the waiting wagon. Elias followed, his lungs burning, the wound on his arm throbbing with every jolt. Behind them, Jedediah Wynn's furious roar shook the quiet valley. He was coming, boots pounding, a man fueled by rage and the terror of being exposed. Elias stole a glance over his shoulder and saw the rancher closing the distance, the rifle jerking up for another shot. Ilias reached the wagon just as Clara scrambled onto the seat. He vaulted up, grabbed the reins, and lashed the horses with a sharp flick. The team surged forward, hooves kicking up dirt and frost. "Hold on!" Or, Elias shouted. The wagon jolted down the rutted trail, every bounce jarring his injured arm. Clara ducked low, clutching the seat with white-knuckled hands. The valley stretched ahead like a frozen throat, narrow and unforgiving. Elias knew the main road would take them straight toward town, but also straight into open ground where Jedediah and any help he gathered could overtake them. He veered the wagon off the familiar trail, steering toward a rocky side path only he knew. He had hauled timber through this way once, years ago, and remembered the route was risky. Steep slopes, loose stones, and a narrow canyon that could trap them if they weren't careful. Clara glanced at him, her face pale and streaked with dirt. "He'll follow," she whispered. "He always said, if I ever ran, he'd find me." Elias kept his eyes on the path ahead, jaw tight. "Then let him try." The horses pounded down the slope, the wagon rattling like a box of bones. Pine branches whipped past, scratching his coat and catching in Clara's tangled hair. Behind them, the distant drum of hooves grew louder. Jedediah had mounted a horse, and by the sound of it, he wasn't alone anymore. "They're gaining!" Clara cried. Elias risked a glance back and saw two riders, silhouettes against the pale morning sun, with Jedediah in the lead, his rifle glinting like a promise of death. The wagon hit a rut and jolted hard, nearly throwing Elias from the seat. He gritted his teeth and forced the horses onward. Every nerve in his body screamed to keep moving. The canyon loomed ahead, its walls rising like jagged sentinels. Shadow swallowed them as they entered, the echo of the wagon wheels magnified in the tight space. Here the terrain favored them. Horses couldn't gallop full speed, and gunfire risked ricochets. Elias breathed hard, feeling the sweat and cold air mix against his skin. "Almost there," he muttered more to himself than to Clara. The canyon twisted, and in the dim light, the mouth of an old mining tunnel appeared like a black scar in the rock. Elias remembered it from his logging days, abandoned, dangerous, but it led to the other side of the ridge. "Inside," he commanded, jerking the reins to a halt. He leapt down, helping Clara from the seat as the wagon skidded against loose gravel. "But," she began, "no time. Move!" They sprinted into the tunnel, the air turning damp and cold. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the smell of earth and decay filled Elias's lungs. Behind them, the echo of pursuit grew louder, hooves clattering on stone, voices shouting. Elias ducked behind a rotting timber support and listened to the chaos outside. The canyon amplified the sounds. Curses, the scrape of hooves, the sharp command of Jedediah's voice. For the first time since the escape began, Elias felt a spark of hope. If they could get through the mine and out the other side, they might vanish into the hills before Jedediah's men realized which way they'd gone. But as a distant shot rang out, the sharp ping of ricochet sparking off the rock, Elias knew the fight wasn't over. The wilderness had given them a chance, but survival would demand every ounce of courage left in him. The air inside the abandoned mine was damp and cold, carrying the faint scent of earth and rusted metal. Elias Boone pressed his back against the rough wall, his injured arm throbbing with every heartbeat. Beside him, Clara Wynne trembled in the darkness, her chains finally gone, her body free but still carrying the weight of years in captivity. "Breathe," Elias whispered. "Just breathe. You're safe for now." Safe. It was a word Clara had not dared to believe in years. For several long minutes they listened as the sounds of Jedediah Wynne and his riders echoed through the canyon outside. Hooves clattered, voices cursed, but the noise eventually grew distant. The collapsed side passage and the confusing terrain had bought them precious time. When Elias finally led Clara out the far end of the mine, the morning sun felt like a baptism. The light struck her face, and for the first time she didn't lower her gaze in shame. She blinked hard against the brightness, inhaling the crisp air, as if she could drink freedom into her lungs. "Is it really over?" she whispered. "Not yet," Elias said, though his voice was gentle. "But we've got the hardest part behind us. You're free, Clara, and the whole town's gonna know the truth." They reached a small logging outpost by nightfall, where Elias's old friends and a local sheriff named Corbin Tate listened in stunned silence to Clara's story. Her voice shook, but each word carried the weight of survival and undeniable truth. When the sheriff saw the raw wounds on her ankles, the filth in her tangled hair, and the haunted depth in her eyes, there was no doubt left. A posse rode to the Wynn Ranch the next morning. They found the Outhouse chain, the splintered ring, and the bloodstains in the yard. Jedediah Wynn was gone. Some said he'd fled into the hills, refusing to face justice. Others believed the land itself would take him, the way the frontier sometimes swallowed men who had poured too much evil into its soil. In town, Clara began the slow, painful process of healing. For weeks, she barely spoke above a whisper. She would wake in the night, flinching at imagined footsteps. But every morning, she walked outside to let the sun touch her face, a ritual Elias encouraged. "Sunlight don't lie," he told her. "When it's on your skin, that means the world sees you, and it means you're alive." The townsfolk, those who had gossiped about the strange Wynn family for years, now found themselves confronting their own silence. People had heard whispers, had noticed the isolation, but nobody had stepped in. Clara's ordeal became a lesson that traveled through every saloon, church, and dinner table in the county. Evil thrives in silence. Looking away makes you part of the problem. Elias stayed by Clara's side through the winter. They rebuilt trust slowly, like a fire coaxed from damp wood. She learned to laugh again, soft at first, then louder as the weeks passed. Her resilience astonished everyone who met her. By spring, Sheriff Tate organized a search party into the hills, but Jedediah Wynn was never found. The frontier has a way of burying some stories without a grave, and maybe that was justice enough. Reflections for modern life stories like this one may belong to the harsh 1880s frontier, but their lessons echo in today's world. We live in a society that's far more connected, yet isolation and abuse can still hide in plain sight. How many times have we scrolled past a story of someone in need thinking, "It's not my problem"? How often do we let fear of inconvenience keep us from speaking up for someone who can't speak for themselves? Elias Boone reminds us that one person's courage can break a chain, sometimes literally. Clara's story is proof that resilience lives even in the most broken hearts, and that stepping forward when it's dangerous can change a life forever. For an American audience today, especially older viewers who have lived through decades of change, this story holds a clear truth. Our communities are only as strong as the compassion we practice, a closing that invites thought and debate. Some say Jedediah Wynn never left the hills, that his ghost still lingers near the collapsed mine. Others believe a man who buries that much hate eventually gets claimed by the land he poisoned. But there's another ending too, one that lives in the hearts of those who hear this story. Elias Boone didn't just save a young woman. He forced an entire community to confront its silence. So we ask you, what would you have done if you were Elias Boone? Would you have risked your life to free Clara, knowing the cost? And how can we, in today's world, make sure no one suffers unseen in the shadows of our own communities? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. Your voice might spark a conversation that saves someone else's life. Thank you and call to action. Thank you for staying with this story of courage, survival, and hard-earned freedom. If this tale moved you, if it made you think about the world we live in today, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Every story we tell is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can survive and ordinary people can become heroes.